Hi everybody, and welcome to the Writing Lounge. Today we are going to work on how to avoid plagiarism. So let's see what we can do. Let's get some techniques down and figure out what plagiarism is, what it isn't, and how we can avoid it. Okay, a little bit about myself for those of you who were new to these recordings. I'm Allison Freyberg, and I'm Professor of Communication and Cultural Studies in the School of Business and Society at the University of Redlands. And we have the Writing Lounge here as a resource for students, alumni, guests, essentially anyone who'd like to drop by. And what we do is we work on one aspect of writing or communication every couple of weeks and try to get you some tips and strategies to get you through those rocky roads that have to do with writing projects. So today is plagiarism. I'm also the associate director of international programs, and you can find out all about our programs at the University of Redlands School of Business and Society by just clicking down here. Okay, here we go. So, what's plagiarism? We tell you not to do it, right? But do we really spend enough time figuring out what it is, what it isn't, what the lines are, and why it's such a big deal? So let's talk about a couple of things. Now, according to APA, which is the documentation style that we use in the social sciences quite often, and it's what we use here at the University of Redlands School of Business and Society, they describe plagiarism as this, and I've highlighted the words for you that seem most relevant, that plagiarism is the act of presenting the words, ideas, or images of another as your own. And then there's all sorts of other stuff here that goes along with it, but it's the idea of presenting ideas as your own that aren't your own, okay? And then at the University of Redlands, we have the academic honesty policy, which also shows that basics of honesty and academic integrity include properly and appropriately referencing all work that draws on the ideas, words, and work of others to credit those thinkers, and yada, 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 and what does this all mean? Now, I do have a bit of a shorthand explanation for why plagiarism is such a big deal in universities. And it's not because we just want to make your lives miserable. I promise you it isn't that. When you think about it, university work, academic work, is really about one thing. Now, we may call it all sorts of things, but what it's really about is confronting and understanding the ideas that have come before us and finding a way to contribute meaningfully to that conversation that precedes us. In so many ways, our academic work is about understanding other people's work and finding our way through it to contribute to it. And that's why attribution of people's ideas is so important. Okay. Okay, so we have to come over, we have to do the nasty stuff, right? Here's the stuff that's obviously not okay. Buying papers and submitting them as your own. How about hiring someone else to write your papers? Not okay. And probably the biggest problem I see these days. Finding stuff, putting it in your paper, and somehow creating the impression that it's your idea, well, that's not okay either. Cutting and pasting stuff into your posts or papers, not okay. You can't just sort of copy and paste and plop stuff in. How about this one? You're plagiarizing, and then when you're called out on it, say, oh, sorry, I sent the wrong file. No, come on, you didn't send the wrong file. We know this. We all know this. And submitting a document with the caveat saying, I just need to add the citations, well, that's not okay either, because we just don't know which ideas are yours and which are others and what's going on. And if we can't tell whose ideas are whose, nobody can, and then we can't assess your work. Now, that's the obvious stuff. What about the really confusing stuff? And if you're sitting here listening to this webinar on plagiarism, you're not doing the nasty stuff. You're getting confused by some of the more subtle, nuanced aspects of citation and citing your sources. right? How about this one? Am I supposed to cite my own work? And can I use stuff from my previous papers? Well, yeah, you can, but you have to cite it. And what you can't do is essentially recycle papers from other courses. So if you had a paper you wrote for economics class and you want to change the intro and change the conclusion and submit it for your international business course, that's not okay. But if there's something meaningful from a previous paper you've written that you do want to bring into a current paper, then you can do that. You just have to cite it. What about if it's common knowledge? Do I have to cite? No. Then the follow-up question, of course, is what's common knowledge? And I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. We tell you all the time to attribute your sources, but what does it really mean? I'm going to show you. What if it was a bunch of sources and I just absorbed it? Or what if I just know it? Cite it. Okay? If it's information you got from somewhere else, you need to cite it. What if I use my own words? Do I still have to cite? Yes. And that would be paraphrasing, and we're going to talk about that. What's the line between paraphrasing and plagiarizing? I get asked that question a lot. I'm going to show you. And can someone edit my papers for me? No, no. Can someone work with you to help you see patterns in your writing that you need to correct? Yes, absolutely. But you can't just sort of pay people to edit your papers. That's not okay. All right. By the way, for those of you who are listening to this webinar and you want to have these slides have a lot of live links in them. Just email me and I will be happy to send them over your way. Or if you're watching this over on YouTube, just leave a comment in the messages. And my email is at the beginning and the end and the middle of this. And you can always find it at the website for the Writing Lounge, which is redlands.edu/writing lounge. Okay, so what does plagiarism look like? I'm going to give you an example of what it looks like, and then we're going to go into some specifics, and then we're going to do some makeovers. Okay. That's how you understand common citation errors. This is what happens all the time, and this is what I'm going to give you an example of. The most common errors occur when using sources that are left out of the body of the text, so we forget to include the citations. That's what happens. Second most common thing I see is that citations aren't included in each sentence from which information is taken, and or not included in the references page. Review that right now. Okay, we're going to understand some common citation errors. And this is our sample. We're going to use it for the next few examples, so you'll get familiar with it. I'm going to read the first paragraph. Unemployment is at the highest level in California since the 1930s during the Depression. In the 1930s, more than 20% of people were out of work and another 25% were unable to find adequate work. The areas greatest affected were in manufacturing and agriculture, where unemployment rates peaked at 31% and 28% respectively. Now, since this is on a slide that says errors, there's errors in this example. And the most obvious error is there is no citation of this work. I obviously got this information from somewhere, 20%, 25%, 31%, 28%, but nowhere in this paragraph is there a citation of where I got that information. By the way, I wrote all these, so if I were to call myself in to give me a talking to about plagiarism, writer Allison might say, no, there's a citation. Look, there's in the references page. It was Bellflower, and I got the information from the U.S. Department of Labor and from Bellflower. See, I put it in the references. It's not enough to just have it in the references. It has to be in the body of your paper as well, a proper citation. Okay, so look at this, same paragraph. So in red here, in the 1930s, more than 20% of people were out of work, another 25% were unable to find adequate work. There needs to be a citation right there Like if that's from Bellflower, I have to say it's from Bellflower in that sentence. In that sentence. Same thing with the next sentence. I got that information from somewhere, so I have to say in that sentence where I got that information from. It's not enough to just have it in the references. So, the problem, there was no citation for the information in the body of the text. That's a problem. In-text citations, you have to remember, refer only to the sentence in which the citation appears. So just because all that information might have been from Bellflower, you can't just slap Bellflower at the end of the paragraph and assume that it will be applied to everything in that paragraph. It's just not how it works. It has to be in each sentence. It has to be clear that that information comes from somewhere else. And finally, if you're going to use the exact words of others, then you better put them in quotation marks. Okay, those are the most common citation errors. Sounds hard, but it's easier than you think. This would have been a decent correction. Unemployment in California is at its highest level since the Depression, when the rates were 20% for the unemployed and 25% for those underemployed. My phrasing, Bellflower's information, my sentence, my phrasing, my voice, my way of saying it. So all I need for APA for that paraphrase is Bellflower 2011. You need the who wrote it and when they wrote it. We're going to go over those specifics again. In the next sentence, now 31 and 28%, that's actually something that I found in both Bellflower and U.S. Department of Labor records. So I wrote here, studies identified, blah, 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 blah. There's the information. And then Bellflower 2011, U.S. Department of Labor 2011. That's where the information came from. That's good. Here's another way of doing it. Same thing. I'm identifying in each sentence that the information came from somewhere else. Bellflower 2011 explains blah, 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 blah. She identifies blah, 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 corroborating Department of Labor findings. Both of those, perfectly fine. It works. So here's your reminder. Every time you don't say it's somebody else's idea, you are saying it's your idea. So if you don't signal that it's someone else's idea, Bellflower, Department of Labor, if you don't signal that you got the information from somewhere else, you're telling your audience you got it from you. So remember that. And the plagiarism happens when those get confused. When you mean to say it's somebody else's idea, but you inadvertently imply that it's your idea. Now, what's common knowledge? It's when 8 out of 10 people in your audience are likely to know the information. So you have to think every time you write, who's my audience? Now, if I'm speaking to an audience of economists, for example, I won't have to spend a lot of time citing and defining opportunity cost as a concept. Economists know what an opportunity cost is. Now, if I'm instead addressing an audience of first-year students at a university, just a general audience, I should probably define opportunity cost, but because I don't think that 8 out of 10 people in that first-year class are going to know what that is. So it's always about figuring out who your audience is. And if you want to take a Scribber Common Knowledge quiz, you can do so right here. Again, just request these slides from me and I'll send them on over to you. Now, kind of have an idea of when you should cite, but how do I cite these sources? There's two ways. We can cite them with quotations, or we can cite them with paraphrases. Quotation is when you use the exact words and phrases of a source. Okay, it's somebody else's words, phrasing, and phrasings. And you need to put those in quotation marks. When you're using APA or when you're writing in the social sciences, you're generally going to want to quote only minimally when you bring in sources. You want to quote when the original phrasing is absolutely key and you can't imagine another way to say it. And only the way the author has said it is going to make sense. Where the words really matter. That's when you want to quote. Paraphrasing? Now that's when you summarize the idea with your own words, your own voice, your own style, your own way of putting sentences together. That all has to be yours. It's just that you're summarizing somebody else's idea. We get into a lot of trouble with paraphrases because we start to use their language, their way of putting sentences together, their style, their voice, and we just change up a few words. That's not paraphrasing. Paraphrasing has to be all your own way of saying things, but you're just explaining somebody else's idea. In APA and the social sciences, you want to paraphrase most of the time because most of the information you're relying on is going to be from reports and numbers and concepts, and you're just bringing those in. You're going to want to paraphrase them and put them in your own words, in your own language, in your own style, but reference them. And I'll show you how to cite them. Now, so in text citations, this is the information you need. You need the author, who's responsible for the work. You need the date, when was it published? And you need the location, where did this quote appear? By the way, for those of you who are interested, this is a live link and you can go find directly the information from APA. So here's some examples. Parker argues that globalization practices exceed labor demand. There's the author. There's the date. There's the location. And that's the quote, and there's the quotation marks to show that what's inside them are actually the words of Parker. Okay. Now there's a few other ways to do this. I just include them up here for you, and you can review them on your own. The thing to remember always is that with a quotation, you need to say who said it, when they said it, where the quote is found, and then you need the quotation marks. That's quotations. When you're citing a paraphrase, when you're summarizing someone else's idea in your own words, the information you need to cite is the author, who said it, whose idea is this, and when did they publish this. You don't need quotation marks because you're not quoting anything. And you don't need a location because you're not quoting anything that needs to be located. You're summarizing someone else's idea. Here's some examples. A structural shift was isolated as the primary reason for increased work hours in the United States. There's your author, Shore, and the date, 2015. And that's it. You've cited. Here are some other formats that you can look at. Remember, in each of these formats, it's my sentence, my words, my style, my diction, my syntax, my, everything, except for the idea. I'm summarizing someone else's idea, someone else's information. And again, you can find more information at APA right here on the live link. So, just a quick review, little pop quiz. Is this a quote or a paraphrase? Ernest Washington of the Bureau of Labor notes that 42% of homeowners have more than 20 years left to pay on their mortgages. That's a paraphrase. I don't see any quotation marks. I don't see any page numbers or location information. Political theorist Amy Singh suggests quotation marks, blah, 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 and a location. So that's a quote. Economist Nancy Garcia says, quote, blah, blah, blah. There's a location. But then the next sentence, I'm going to be summarizing or explaining the quotation. By this, she means yada, yada, yada. That's going to be a paraphrase. So we have a quote, and in the next sentence, a paraphrase. Now you'll notice I don't have the author's name or the date in the second sentence, but I do have a signal with this pronoun that it's still the idea of Garcia's that came in the sentence before. So you can, that's a nice way to carry on and explain and paraphrase, but still signal that it's somebody else's idea. And here's another version of that. Daniel Ackerman arguing blah, blah, blah. That's in quotes. And so this is a Q and a P because the second sentence is explaining the quote. I've done the pronoun trick here, and I have a quote and then a paraphrase, and it's all good. All right, let's do some makeovers. We'll do 3 kinds of makeovers, okay? Makeover number 1, these are the most common problem areas I see. Paraphrasing problems. There's so many problems with paraphrasing because, and they all come from relying too closely on the text that you're trying to paraphrase from. I'll say this once, I'll say this a million times. If you are looking at the text you're trying to paraphrase, you're not going to paraphrase well. You need to be able to not look at that text and summarize someone else's idea. Because if you're looking at that text, you're going to use their language, you're going to use their phrases, you're going to use their voice, their syntax, their way of constructing sentences, all that stuff. They're going to leak into your work if you're staring at it. So let's look at how this shakes out. We have a quote from Linda Hill et al. In an article called Collective Genius out of Harvard Business Review. It's on innovation leadership. And the quote is, "The rhetoric of innovation is often about fun and creativity, but the reality is that innovation is hard work and can be a very taxing, uncomfortable process, both emotionally and intellectually." That's a quote. It's on page 96 of that article. Okay, so here's attempt number 1 to paraphrase that. Now remember, with a paraphrase, you're not quoting anybody. You're not using their exact words or phrases. But what have I done in attempt number 1? Everything in red is phrasing from the quote itself. So there's a lot of problems right here. Let's see what the problems are. Exact phrasings are used without quotation marks. That's the stuff in red. That's directly from the text, and I didn't indicate it's not my words. I didn't indicate that it's Hill's words. So problem number 1. Problem number 2, I stole the syntax from the original. I stole the wording, the way the sentence is made. You can tell I was staring at that sentence, changed out a few words, and somehow called that a paraphrase? No. And there's absolutely no citation. I don't see at all anything here saying this is Linda Hill's idea. So there's 3 big problems here with attempt number 1. Same thing, let's look at attempt number 2. Let's see if I get any better. Now you can see the difference here. It's all the same, except I added Hill et al. 2014. Hey, that's good, right? Because a paraphrase, you just need the author and the date. No, because I still have all that stuff in red. That's the exact phrasing from the quotation. So I've used exact phrasing from the quotation without quotation marks. Not okay. And I still just stared at the quote, changed a few words around, and pretended it was my words. It's not. And the citation doesn't include relevant quotation marks or page number. Okay, so you'd have to put all that stuff in red in quotes and then add a page number inside the parentheses here. Okay, so still bad. Now, attempt number 3. We're starting to get there. There's fewer red words, but it's still too close because I'm really still just staring at this sentence and changing out some words. I'm not creating the sentence from my understanding of Hill's idea. All right, so I gave you 3 lousy examples. I'm going to give you 3 good ones now. How about this? Real innovation work involves difficult, often exhausting courses of action, despite our cultural tendency to think of it as being about playful invention. Hill et al., 2014. It's pretty good. That's my sentence. I was not staring at the quote to write that sentence. That's me explaining Hill's idea. All right, attempt number 5, another way that's good. Hill et al. Tackled the organizational image of innovation in their study of leadership. Observing our tendency to think about innovation as playful and fun, they offer a dose of reality by recognizing the difficult processes that lie at the heart of genuinely innovative endeavors. That is yummy. I wrote that sentence myself based on my understanding of Hill's point. And I indicated that it's Hill. And then in the next sentence, where's my signal that it's still Hill's idea and not mine? They offer. See that? That's the signal to say it's not my idea. And you can do it tighter too. Attempt number 6. Underlying the perception of innovation is simply fun are difficult processes of organizational innovation. Is that my idea? Nope. It's Hill's. Great. 3 different ways to do a good paraphrase. You're going to do a good paraphrase if you simply do not stare at the quote. If you're interested in getting some live demonstration of paraphrasing, there's actually a Writing Lounge webinar on the Writing Lounge site that's called Paraphrasing Demo. And I just go through and do a bunch of examples for you live. Okay? So here are the keys to successful paraphrasing. When you are explaining someone else's idea, do not look at the text. And if you can't explain the idea without looking at it, then you're not ready to paraphrase it. All right, makeover number 2, number problems. It's the same kind of issue as the paraphrasing problems because you're trying to paraphrase when you're bringing numbers into your writing. So we have this thing I got from the Bureau of Labor Stats, and it's on access to paid leave, and it's all numbers, 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 yada, 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 numbers, numbers, numbers. And you have to bring that into your paper. These are some numbers from here you want to bring back into your paper. Here's attempt number 1. Now, you know that the problem is going to be with the red words. 75% of private industry workers had access to paid sick leave. That's exact wording from the quote. There's no way I could have written that out of my own mind. I simply copied it from the original and didn't indicate it was a quote. Same thing happens, prevalent among full-time workers at 86%. These are all phrases from the original quote, and I can't just grab them and use them and not show any citation. And in fact, here you have the same problem as the first attempt on the previous makeover. Exact phrasings are used without quotation marks. I took the same sentence and just changed some words and pretended it was my sentence. And there's no citation. Where does this come from? I have no idea. Okay, Let's try attempt number 2. Same thing. Okay, look what I've done. I've added BLS 2021. Great. Thank you. Nothing else here has changed, however. So I still have the phrasings that are used without quotation marks. I have stolen syntax. And, adding BLS 2021 only works if the rest of it is a paraphrase. Those red words indicate I have stolen phrases and not indicate, and I didn't indicate that I used somebody else's phrasings. All right, let's see what we can do better here. Okay, this is what happens all the time. I give up. I'm just going to quote the whole thing. No, it's technically not plagiarism, but nobody is going to read that. You haven't hosted this information, you haven't synthesized it, you haven't processed it, you haven't figured out how to paraphrase it. You can't just sort of give up and throw a big long quote in there that nobody's going to read anyway. Or worse, they're going to stop reading your paper and go to the BLS report. Okay, let's see what we can do. Here's attempt number 4. It's pretty good. What I did was I took the information, the numbers that I needed, I wrote them down on a separate piece of paper. I stopped looking at the quote, and I built my sentences from the information I have pulled. As of March 2020, access to paid sick leave varied greatly across occupations, even among those with full-time work. For example, 92% of managerial and professional workers had access, but only 59% of service workers did. That's a paraphrase. I'm just taking the numbers and I'm using my own voice, my own syntax, my own way of making sentences to explain those numbers that are from the BLS. Keys to successful number use, as I just said, write the relevant numbers and what they mean on a separate doc. Then build your paraphrasing around those numbers. Don't quote big blocks of numbers. You have to explain your way through them. And the last makeover we're going to do is a little more subtle, but it's a very common error. And it's when we lose track of who's talking in a paragraph, whose ideas are whose. And this happens a lot even when we're doing pretty well citing our sources. So here we have that Hill quote again, but I made it a little longer. I added, in fact, innovation problem solving may feel unnatural and even dangerous in many organizations if their leaders are not skilled. So there's the whole quote. Here's attempt number 1. First sentence sounds kind of good. In their study of innovation leadership, Hill et al. Identify a disconnect between the image of innovation and its reality. Okay, that's good. Hill, date, my sentence. Rather than being about fun and creativity, quote, they contend that, quote, innovation is hard work. Okay, so what do we need for a quotation? We need the stuff in quotation marks, which we have. We have an indication of who the author is. We use the pronoun trick here. And we need a location. Obviously, we're still referring to the 2014 text. And there's the location, page 96. Great. Everything's going great. Innovation work can be demanding and cause a lot of discomfort for all involved. Whose idea is that? That's actually from Hill. But the way I've written it, it makes it sound like it's my idea because I didn't say it was Hill's. See that? I've lost track of whose voice is whose. Look at the next sentence, sentence 4. Indeed, to tackle problems innovatively can feel like a very risky proposition for organizations. Again, that's Hill. It's not me, but I've done nothing in this sentence to say it's Hill's. Therefore, I'm implying it's me. so that which is not true. When I get to the fifth sentence, this was the case for the leadership team at yada yada last year during their new product launch. At this point, I'm a reader. I don't know whose ideas is whose. And once you've lost track of whose idea is whose, it's over. Okay? That's what you got to watch for. That's a subtler thing to look for. And it's a very easy fix. I did it right here. All I did was add they explain, and that's a good signal that it's still not my idea. And then in sentence 4, all I did was add a parenthetical citation here. It's somebody else's idea. All works out. Everything's good. Beautiful paragraph. So, key to successful voice tracking: provide a citation or signal in each sentence so the reader knows which ideas come from your source and which ideas are yours. If you don't say it's someone else's idea, you are saying it's yours. And if it's not yours and you're saying it's yours, that's plagiarism. So let's do a quick recap. We clarified what counts as plagiarism. We identified common citation errors. We defined common knowledge. We explained when to quote and when to paraphrase. And we reviewed makeovers of paraphrasing, number use, and voice tracking errors. Here's some resources from the APA for you. Again, this slideshow is full of live links. Email me or contact me in some way. I'm very easy to find. And we will get you those slides. Okay, as always, you can find me at the Writing Lounge, redlands.edu Writing Lounge. And we have coming up webinars on organizing your ideas and conquering writer's block. So thanks for coming, and I hope to see you in the Writing Lounge soon. Let me know what you think, okay?